Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and this is a one-on-one interview, and today I'm joined by a special guest, Sky Sports News reporter Dharmesh Sheth. How are you doing, Dharmesh? You all right?
Very well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. We're going to be talking about all sorts. We're going to be talking about the ownership, the Glazers, and of course transfers as well. A lot going on over the last 48 hours, a week, whatever you want to call it, whatever timescale you put on it. There's a lot going on at Manchester United. Let's start with the ownership stuff then. It's been a very strange week with different reports from different camps on what is going on. Just in your words, what is the sort of current latest on the ownership?
It's a very, very good question. I mean, you say it's been a strange week. It's been an eventful week. It's been like this for the last few months, hasn't it? And I think it just feels like it's dragging on now. And I think there must be a frustration. I can tell it in the question that you're asking. There's a frustration from you, and if you're probably representative of the fans as well, because there'll be frustration from the fans, but there'll probably be a frustration with Erik ten Hag as well. I was at the FA Cup final, and after the game, he was asked the question specifically about the owners and how much that needs to get sorted so that he can sort out his plans. And I think he's putting a brave face on it. He said, look, I've got a plan. I've got one plan. I haven't got a plan A if a certain ownership comes in, and I haven't got a plan B. I've got a plan. So he's putting a brave face on it because he knows he can't do anything about it just now. But I think privately there must be a degree of frustration about how long it's taking. Surely everyone at United would have wanted this done and dusted a couple of months ago so that they could look ahead to a summer transfer window with a degree of certainty, because now is Erik ten Hag in a position really where he knows exactly how much he can spend, how much he needs to raise from potential sales to fund those new signings. It's just a little bit up in the air. I mean, I think the last count, it was like the fifth round of bidding or something, was it? I've actually lost count now. And on Monday they were talking about like the Qataris have won, and then those reports they had to be kind of rowed back on. So it's a degree of uncertainty that still exists with regard to this takeover. And if you think about it, we're talking now in the middle of June, and the transfer window is now open, and we're still no nearer really to finding out who the new ownership is going to be. And if you think about the frustrations that Erik ten Hag and the recruitment team might have, say for example this takeover eventually happens, but we're talking about the back end of August. A lot of the first choice signings that would have cost a lot of money, will they still be around, hanging around for this takeover to happen? I think that's where the frustration will lie. We saw what happened last summer, and I'm sure that United and Erik ten Hag don't want to repeat where, they go into the season having not done their priority signings. The two defeats, the damaging defeats happened at the start of the season, and then there was almost like, we need to back him. And suddenly Casemiro and Anthony come in at bigger money than potentially they would have had to have spent had they come in earlier on in the window. So I think they want to avoid all of that. And if it's not going to happen during this transfer window, I think ten Hag and the recruitment team probably just need to know, look, this is what's going to happen. Let's just deal with it as it is now.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Some clarity somewhere. As fans, we don't know.
Exactly.
It seems, looking around the sort of journalism world as well, that no one really knows what's going on. The people who have contacts with Qatar don't know. That they're being told that people don't know what's happening. Jim Ratcliffe's team don't seem to know what's happening. It's just typical of the Glazers almost, where they're taking their time with things like they did with those transfers at the end of last summer, and no one knows what's going on in the meantime. It's ridiculous.
If you look at it from the Glazers' perspective, they've probably seen two bidders who have come in, and especially the Qatari side, where they've gone up to 5 billion in 5 rounds of bidding. And the Glazers have probably thought, well, they've gone this far. Well, let's get another round of bidding to even, raise that further. That could be one of the thought processes going through their head, because, the noises that have been going around is they want closer to 6 billion for Manchester United rather than what we believe to be around 5 billion that's on offer at the moment. So all up in the air. But I mean, as you mentioned, that word clarity, I think everyone wants it now.
Yeah, in terms of how this affects budgets and transfers, there seems to be sort of mixed reports at the moment. You're hearing some people saying we need, the new owner to come in, regardless of who it is, so we can spend big this summer. Other people saying it sort of won't matter almost who comes in will have a similar budget either way. What's your understanding of how the takeover could affect this immediate transfer window?
Yeah, the immediate transfer window, some of the noises I've heard is there won't be that much change to how much United could actually spend, simply because it's not a case of an owner coming in and just saying, right, here's 400 million, we can easily spend it. They probably could do that. They probably would have the money to do that. The issue is you've got to adhere to financial fair play rules. And I think once later windows start happening with a new owner in situ, that's when you'll start seeing potentially bigger outlays for Manchester United, simply because they'll be able to get the books ready with regard to how much revenue is coming in during that period and how much they can spend against that revenue. So yes, of course, there's going to be an increase in the amount that United could spend, but not necessarily as much as people would probably expect or hope. The other reports that I've read is, it may not affect structural and infrastructure expenditure. So, that's been another issue for United fans and United generally. They've seen the likes of Manchester City, even Tottenham Hotspur with, new stadiums and new training grounds and new infrastructures around the training ground, particularly with City and around the stadium. Whereas it feels like, and the perception is that United have stood still with regard to their training facilities and the stadium as well. I mean, they will argue that there has been some sort of investment in the training ground, but I mean, you're a match goer every other week at Old Trafford, I'm sure, and you will see that compared to a lot of other stadiums, it has gone a little bit behind. So I think there could be an opportunity there if there is a new ownership, whereby the infrastructure and investment in infrastructure, training ground, stadium could possibly be started immediately, as opposed to throwing, 300, 400, 500 million pounds at transfer fees.
Interesting. Yeah, there definitely needs to be work done, don't there? You see, every year there seems to be a leak in something, or there was talk about the state of the conditions where the women's team were training and Portaloos and all this sort of stuff, and you just think that none of this is befitting of what's supposedly the biggest club in England, or certainly is the biggest club in England, but they don't act like the biggest club in England. Talking about transfers there, then let's move on to that a little bit. What, as far as you understand it, are United's main positional targets this summer? Because there's been a lot of talk about all different manner of things. Right back was an interest at one point, then we saw a new contract for Dalot, and that seems to have gone quiet. Who are United? Sorry, what positions are United after this summer?
Just picking up on that point, the right back, I think it was more of a priority position in the last two transfer windows, but I think he's seen Aaron Wan-Bissaka perform really well, number one. And because there are other positions that are of higher priority, I think a right back has moved down the pecking order. So they signed Darlow on to a new contract. They've got Wan-Bissaka on a contract as well. So I think they'll just say, look, we can move with that for now, because there are other areas of the pitch that need strengthening and a much higher priority than the right back position. I'm talking about a striker. I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that that's the priority position for Manchester United this transfer window. It has been in the last transfer window as well. We know we saw Cristiano Ronaldo leave in very acrimonious circumstances in November, and a lot of people thought, right, he's left in November, it's given us enough time to recruit properly in January. But the financial situation didn't dictate that United were able to do that, and hence they were bringing in stopgaps like Wout Weghorst on loan until the rest of the season. But the number 9, 100% is the number one priority as far as I'm aware, closely followed by a central midfielder. I think central defender as well is a priority position, but I'm told that they will recruit in that position if there's a departure in that area. And then probably just below that, but it's starting to get a bit of traction now, is the goalkeeping position. So those four areas, probably in that order, I would say would be the priority positions for United. I mean, they went through the whole of last season effectively without a number 9. Yes, Wout Weghorst was there, but someone who was at Manchester United on a long-term deal. Martial was there, of course, but his season was disrupted hugely by injury. Rashford scored 30 goals, but United fans will argue that his best position is coming in off the left. Imagine how many goals he can get if you get how many goals United can get, generally, if you've got an out-and-out number 9 with Rashford on the left.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's sort of break down those positions then and go through them one by one. So you start with striker. That's United's main focus, and quite rightly so. Like you said, we've not had anyone on a long-term contract in that position since Romelu Lukaku, and even he, you can sign a long-term deal. He was gone 2 years later, and since then it's been Cavani's and Igalo's and Ronaldo's, people in their mid to late 30s coming in on short-term deals and leaving. There was a lot of talk about Harry Kane. And that interest seemed to be genuine. Obviously, you can correct me if I'm wrong there. Then all the reports coming out yesterday, United have decided to step away from the pursuit of Harry Kane. It looks too difficult to do. Tottenham don't want to sell. Then this sort of Rasmus Højlund talk, what seemed to be originally to be a Kane and Højlund type, approach, now seems to be Højlund only. Is there someone to replace Kane? Is there a sort of a more established striker? Who are the main targets there? And what's going on with this Kane, Højlund, and maybe someone else involved as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, from the outset, we were saying number 9 is a priority, but we started getting information that maybe United wanted to bring in 2 strikers. Yeah. One who's been there and done it, like a Harry Kane, potentially like a Victor Osimhen, and then a younger striker. The Harry Kane situation is a very difficult one, because was there interest from Manchester United? Would they have liked to have signed him? I think so, yes. 100% there was interest. I think that if he was ever to go to a Premier League club, everyone was kind of saying, look, that seems to be the fit. Look, City were after him before, but they've got Haaland now. Liverpool don't really need a Harry Kane. They've recruited in their attacking areas. Newcastle was a shout, but you're talking about Isak and Callum Wilson there already. And what, would Tottenham ever do business with Arsenal or Chelsea? Very unlikely. And would Kane actually go to Arsenal or Chelsea? I know funnier things have happened, but you just couldn't see it. The information we've started getting the last week was that United are unlikely to pursue the deal for Harry Kane, and that's probably due to a couple of factors. One, the cost. You've got to remember he's coming up to 30 years of age with 1 year left on his contract. I mean, if you look at any other player, you're not looking at £100 million, but it is Harry Kane. And you've got to look at, you can't blame Spurs for putting that kind of price tag on him, because as much as people will say, well, he's nearly 30 years old and he's a year left on his contract, how can he be £100 million? You've got to look at it from Tottenham's perspective. How much is he worth to Tottenham? And you'd probably argue that he's worth probably £100 million, probably even more than that. So I think for those reasons, I think United have pulled out. And in particular, just the fact that, Tottenham don't want to sell, full stop, number one. And at least of all, to a Premier League rival. So I think the noises that United were receiving from Tottenham was, this is not going to happen. So United, I think, have quickly moved away. Maybe just keeping it in the background in case something, crazy happens, that, Harry Kane says, I'm definitely not going to sign a contract. I'm handing in a transfer request, or whatever he wants to do on that case. I see it in a few different scenarios, and you've got to look at it from Tottenham and Harry Kane's perspective as well. If you look at it from Tottenham's perspective, number one priority would be tie him down to a new long-term contract, and Harry Kane becomes a Tottenham player for the rest of his career. That would be the number one option for Tottenham. Whether that would happen, it is questionable, because you've got to look at it from Harry Kane's perspective. How important is that Premier League goal scoring record? He's only 47 behind Alan Shearer now. And how important are trophies? It looks like Tottenham are going to be in the midst of another rebuild again. I don't know how many rebuilds Kane has been.
They're always in a sort of rebuild, aren't they? That's kind of what they do.
Now they've got a new manager. They've got a new manager, no European football at all, So Harry Kane is approaching his 30th birthday. He'll probably have ambitions to do that, but he'll also have ambitions to break that Premier League goal scoring record. People could say, could he actually go to Real Madrid for 3 years and then come back to the Premier League and break that record? Probably he could. He could. He looks like that kind of player who could go on for a few years. You've seen the likes of like Robert Lewandowski playing, in his mid to late 30s. Is Harry Kane going to be that kind of player, kind of just retreating back into a more deep-lying role, which he has started to do in recent years? And then, the worst case scenario for Tottenham is, losing him. But then the other option is, he doesn't sign a new contract and he stays at Tottenham and then he leaves for free next summer. So those are the options, I think, that are around for Tottenham. And I don't think they want to sell to a Premier League rival, hence why United are thinking this is probably not going to be a deal for us. So they're looking at alternative targets because they know they need to bring in and recruit in that position. And Rasmus Højlund, the man you mentioned there, he is a player of interest. He does look like the kind of profile that Erik ten Hag wants. You remember last summer, and in particular when they recruited Wout Weghorst, there seems to be a particular kind of forward that Erik ten Hag looks for. And people are like, that's an interesting, kind of profile, the really tall striker, that number 9. They were going for players like Benjamin Sesko, Sasa Kalajic, all over, 6'4", 6'5". Højlund is that height as well. The only issue you've got with him, he's just burst onto the scene. He is a Danish international, yes. Just burst onto the scene, one good season. Is that a bit of a risk? Probably not if he was coming in as the guy that can learn from another experienced striker. But can United do both of those deals, or is it just going to be a Højlund type signing? That they're looking at Muani as well. There was some information today that I've got that I haven't got confirmed to me. Marcus Thuram, there's a bit of noise around him as well. He would fit the profile, and in particular, he's free. He's a free agent. He's like being touted as one of the most valuable free agents in European football just now. So maybe one to watch there. But, United do really need to recruit in that position. Ideally 2 players. Could it just be one? Could it be a young player like Højlund? Big risk, some would say. But, I think a lot of fans now are thinking the trust is there with Erik ten Hag to do the right thing.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with Højlund for me is the difference in pressure that gets put on him if he's a backup signing or a sort of second striker.
100%.
And if he's the main man,
100%.
People think he needs to come in and score 20 goals. Has there been, I know you mentioned there Muani a little bit, but again, he's someone that is, you look at his goal scoring record and he's hardly prolific. I think he struggles. I don't think he's ever hit 20 league goals, and he's in his mid-20s.
Yeah.
Victor Osimhen was another one that was mentioned for a long time, but when you talk about getting money out, players out of teams, Spurs and Napoli are almost on a par for how difficult it can be to
Napoli
to
another level.
Players.
Napoli are another level. I mean, Tottenham would make it clear, I think, not for sale. We're not selling to a Premier League club, and you'll get that kind of noise. I don't think you ever get that noise from Napoli. Aurelio De Laurentiis, the president, speaks very openly, and I think he almost always says all of his players are for sale. And people like perk their eyes, well, why are we going getting him then? But he will always, almost 100% of the time, get the price that he wants. And if you're talking about Osimhen, still under contract at Napoli, had an absolutely sensational season as they won the title last season. You're looking, in excess of £100 million there. So he will get the money that he wants if he wants to sell, and he will do it on his terms. So that would be another, issue for United with regard to the price with someone like Osimhen and Kane. So I think they're going to have to be very, very clever and recruit properly in that position if they're going to, really fill that position in the way they want to.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation with sort of strikers across Europe at the minute, isn't it? Because that old generation of, Ibrahimovic and Suarez and Lewandowski, Benzema, they're all sort of mid to late 30s now. And there seems to be a void of strikers scoring a lot of goals in their 20s. It's sort of Haaland and Mbappe, and that's kind of it, really, isn't it? Osimhen's kind of maybe broken into that this season, but there isn't a whole host of strikers. Anyway, let's move on to midfield then, because that's another area that we did strengthen in January. We brought in Sabitzer on loan. That seems to have gone cold whether we're going to be keeping him on, but a couple of other names we've seen mentioned. We've seen Rabiot mentioned in there. We've seen Mason Mount mentioned as well. What's your understanding on the Mason Mount situation? A bid rejected yesterday. Do you think United will go back in for more?
Yeah, but look, we know there's an interest. I think United are trying to play this quite cleverly because we knew from the outset there was going to be a big gap in the valuation. All the noises were suggesting Chelsea were asking in excess of £70 million, whereas United, we think, were looking at around the £50-55 million mark. And judging by the first bid, I think that has been proved correct because they've gone in with a £40 million bid, probably knowing full well that it was going to get rejected, but it was rejected immediately. It was dismissed out of hand, were the phrases that I was told yesterday. So you would expect Manchester United to go back in with an improved offer. I just think Chelsea here are in a slight situation because the contract situation of Mason Mount is not in their favour. He's only got 1 year left on his contract. Now, they are doing the right thing by trying to get as much money as they can for someone that they really don't want to let go, because they've tried to get him tied down to a new long-term contract. But if you look at his situation now, we understand that, he wants United now. Right. And so when you've got a situation with a player with 1 year left on his contract and he is making it clear that he wants to go to only one club, it's very difficult for a selling club to create any kind of bidding war for a player, because he's got his heart set on one particular move. So I think Chelsea need to be slightly careful about how many times they say no, given how many times United might bid, because United, I'm told, they will look at other targets. They will go up to a certain amount and say, that's enough. We're comfortable with how much we're bidding for here. We're not going to go any higher. Whereas Chelsea need to be careful simply because if that deal doesn't work out and he doesn't sign a new contract, he'll be 6 months away from being able to sign a pre-contract with a foreign club. And then a further 6 months later, he'll have his pick of any club in Europe, any club in the Premier League. Yeah. And more significantly, Chelsea won't get a penny for him.
And interestingly as well, the point you said about Kane of what he would what he's worth to Tottenham. Mason Mount is worth far less to Chelsea because they've got 6-7 players in his position. They kind of almost need to get rid of a few players, don't they? So you would hope that something
there
could
is
be
that
done
pressure
there.
Because there is that pressure. We were talking about this on Sky Sports News actually just yesterday, because if you look at Mauricio Pochettino, we know he likes to work with a smaller squad, and there's I've lost count how many first team squad players there are. There are over 35. He likes to work with 24, 25. We could see 10 to 15 players leaving. So there's that added pressure, as well as the contract situations of certain players, why Chelsea might be put in a position when it comes to players like Mount.
Onto defender then, you mentioned that as well. Kim Min-jae's been one that's been mentioned a lot. He seems to be the biggest name we've heard over the last sort of few weeks. There were some reports in Italy from, again, over the last month or so that if you believed him, you would think Kim Min-jae was already a Man United player that was so sort of affirmative. And then now, last night, we're seeing that Bayern Munich may have sort of taken the lead in regard to Kim Min-jae. What is United's interest there? What is sort of the truth of that story? Because depending on where you look, it's anywhere from he's already at Bayern or he's already at United.
Yeah, so the information that I've been given, just reflecting on what I said back at the top, that the central defender is a priority position, but probably behind a midfielder and a striker. And I think United would want to make sure that there's a release of one or two players before they bring anyone else in that position. But there might be a little time scale on this one, because I'm told that the representatives are aware of Manchester United's interest. Manchester United do want to sign Kim Min-jae, provided somebody leaves. There's an interesting clause in his contract, though. There's a £42 million release clause, I'm told, but that only kicks in on July the 1st, and there's a 15-day window for that clause to be exercised. Now, I think Napoli are trying to tie him down to a different contract now that will give him a bit more money, of course, but also eliminate that release clause, because they know £42 million, that is a bargain for someone like Kim Min-jae, given the way he performed last season. They're very, very well aware of that. So I was talking about how hard a bargain Aurelius De Laurentiis does strike. He can't do much about this one simply because the release clause exists there. So United have made it clear to Napoli, to Kim Min-jae's representatives, that there is an interest in the player. And I think they'd be prepared, yes, of course, to exercise that release clause of £42 million. But I think there would have to be some sort of departure at United for them to bring in another player of that caliber. Okay,
that's interesting. It doesn't seem as though that there are too many options at centre back so far from what we've seen. That's we'll see.
Axel Disasi. Sorry to interrupt you. Axel Disasi was another one from Monaco, the French international. Yeah, we're told there's an interest there, but probably the one that is plan B potentially if Kim Min-jae doesn't work out. But I mean, I think that has been driven more from the Disasi side of it, because we're hearing that Disasi has got his heart set on moving to Old Trafford. He'd love to move there. Okay. Whereas I think United would like to drive it in their own way. And I think Kim Min-jae is the primary target in that position.
Let's hope we can get one of the primary targets. We keep hearing like, we want Kane, but we're willing to move on. We want Mount, but we're willing to move on. We want Kim Min-jae, but we're willing to, like, hopefully we can get someone that's actually a first target. Let's talk about goalkeeper then. That was the other one you mentioned. And I think this has been a real sort of hot topic amongst United fans. A lot of loyalty, and quite rightly so, to David De Gea, who's won the Premier League for United, has had spells where I would say he was the best goalkeeper in the world for a number of years. I think sort of 2015 to 2018, he was right up there. But I don't know if this was sort of the final straw with a lot of people, but we've seen links to Onana at Inter Milan, and that Champions League final, the two performances from Ederson and Onana sort of showed kind of where goalkeeping is now. And I think Onana in particular, you saw him at the sort of the smaller team, the underdog, playing with his feet, playing out from the back in a way that we've never really seen De Gea do. And surprise, surprise, the next day United are linked with Onana. Who are United's targets as a goalkeeper, and do you think De Gea will leave? There's talks of Saudi Arabia, his contract runs out. It's a really weird position we've got there. Who are we linked to, and what do you see as the latest with David De Gea?
Let's start with De Gea first of all. Okay. Look, there have been positive talks over a new contract. We know that there's a year option on the contract, but United actually, as far as we're aware, haven't triggered that option because they were in talks over doing a different kind of contract and extending. Because we know, a few months ago, there was all this talk about the wages situation at United and how they weren't going to pay, the 350,000, 400,000 pound a week kind of wages anymore. They needed to move away from that because they find themselves in a position when they buy players and different managers have bought different kinds of players, and then a new manager comes in. This doesn't fit my style, but it's so difficult to move on a player on a permanent deal when they're on 250, 300, 350,000 pounds a week. If you take them on loan, United find themselves in a position sometimes of still having to pay some of those wages. So if you think about it, if they'd extended and triggered that option for David De Gea, he'd still be on the same wages that he's on now when he's gotten that original contract. So they're trying to do those talks now to extend his contract, but on a different kind of wage as far as De Gea is concerned. Now, a couple of months ago, it looked like it was smooth sailing. It looks like this was going to happen and that De Gea was staying long term. It's still, as it stands now, hasn't been signed off yet, that contract. And while that contract hasn't been signed off, a club like United have to do due diligence on other goalkeepers in case that deal doesn't go through. So they've been looking at the likes of Porto's Diogo Costa for one. Brentford's David Raya is another one. I mean, I think Brentford were quoting around £40 million. I think Spurs are interested as well. Our information is that United and Tottenham wouldn't want to pay that much for a player who's only got a year left on his contract and has made it clear he's not going to sign a new contract at all. And then the Andre Onana one as well from Inter Milan. And he's been asked about his future and he said all the right things. Look, I'm happy at Inter Milan. It's up to Inter Milan. It's one of those, I'm leaving all of my options open here, but the information that I've got with regard to Onana is that he is one that United have started to have a look at as well. The David De Gea thing might not be completely dependent on what happens with these other goalkeepers, though, because Erik ten Hag, whenever he's asked about David De Gea, publicly always defended him. His line has always been, he's kept the most clean sheets in the Premier League. He's a capable goalkeeper. We love David De Gea. And the noises are that they want him to stay at the football club. But what he will not do is guarantee that David De Gea will be the number one goalkeeper next season if he was to stay at the football club. Because what Ten Hag is trying to do now, in particular, is get healthy competition in every single position so that no one player goes into that team thinking that they're going to play every single week. David De Gea has been in that position. And some might argue, some of his performances might be down to the fact that there isn't that competition for him to push him. So maybe United do need to recruit anyway to provide that competition for David De Gea. So I think with United, just generally, going back to their transfer dealings this summer, you might see a few departures as well. if you look at Eric Ten Hag's squads and the teams that he picks, it always seems to be a certain group of players that he picks all the time that he trusts. And there hasn't been, people coming in from left field saying, yeah, we're going to replace, this is a like-for-like replacement. We've seen it in the central defensive position where, everyone was, Luke Shaw's going to play central defence.
Yeah.
What's going on? He's ahead of some of the other central defenders who are already at the club. So there's that trust that Ten Hag has got there. So maybe he wants to recruit in that position so that he'll have 3, maybe 4, that he knows every single week. If 2 of those 4 are fit, no problem. They go straight into the team. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think he's trying to make that kind of competition, which is very, very difficult because that kind of competition costs a lot of money. And you've got to also look at the mentality of the player. Are they willing to come in thinking, I'm not always going to be first choice here, but I'm going to have to fight for it? And I think that's the kind of mentality United would want now.
I think we need that. I think we've had too many players knowing they're going to get picked every week, and that's, last season, well, the one before the one that's just gone, we've seen players completely, down in tools because they know they're still going to get picked. Just a couple more questions. There's been a couple of sort of left field links, and maybe just because of the Qatar ownership situation, but we've seen rumours of Neymar and Mbappe, and these seem like sort of pie in the sky ideas. But we did sign Ronaldo. We have signed Varane and Di Maria and Falcao and Lukaku and these sort of world names over the last few years. It's not beyond United to surprise people with a big name signing.
Yeah,
not just obviously those particular players, but is there potentially a case where United sign a winger instead of a striker and push Rashford into that number 9 situation? What's your understanding of those 2 transfers in particular, and this idea of maybe getting a winger rather than a number 9 if a Kane isn't available?
I mean, it's a possibility that United might think about. The Neymar situation, I think that was driven more from the Neymar side. He was, as opposed to Manchester United being interested and other clubs being interested, he was almost being offered to these clubs. And I don't think there was an out-and-out interest for Neymar from United. I don't think he fits the profile or is a player that United are actively interested in. If you look at the financial situation at United as well, Neymar's still under contract. He would cost a big transfer fee still, as far as PSG are concerned. And then we're not even talking about the wages yet. So when we're talking about United trying to streamline that side of the football club with wages, etc., they would probably be going in the opposite direction if they were to get someone like Neymar. But as you say, funnier things have happened. I think the Varane one is probably a lot different to a lot of the other signings that they've made. Yeah, he can be looked at as a Galactico, but, he arrived still in his 20s, did Varane. Yes, a few injury problems, but he was playing for Real Madrid. So it wasn't like, oh, this guy's past it. He was coming in and it was a good signing. I think it was different with Ronaldo because of his links with United, and it was that fairy tale return, which kind of turned sour, as we all know how that transpired. I think the Mbappe one, I mean, he's going to get linked with every club now. I mean, the biggest one is always going to be Real Madrid because they tried to sign him. They've always tried to sign him. And I think this summer, I think the club that will get closest to signing him will be like a Real Madrid. But then they'll have their own issues as well with that kind of signing, because not only the money, but also you've got a certain player called Vinicius Junior playing on the left-hand side, and he isn't bad. It's whether, Kylian Mbappe would come in and be happy maybe to play as a central striker, or whether he still wants to stay out on the left-hand side. With regard to United, could I see the Mbappe deal happening? It's very, very difficult. It's like you mentioned there, it's a bit pie in the sky because you don't even know what the ownership situation is going to be like. But you would think if it was the Qatari owners that would come in, they would want to make their mark. Of course they would. They've done it at the other clubs that they've been at, and they'd want to get some sort of marquee signing in there. Be that Mbappe, I'm not so sure.
Okay, so we're signing Mbappe then, that's what you're saying. I hear you. No, of course not. Thank you very much, Dharmesh, for coming on and chatting with us. And thank you to everyone at home for watching as well. Make sure you hit subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. This has been the one-on-one interview with Dharmesh Sheth from Sky Sports News. Thanks for watching.